At that time, I was an intern at the City Hall of Jakarta. I worked for the governor back then, and then I realized in a couple of different meetings that I attend, I never saw a woman leader.
Hi everyone, welcome to Breaking Barriers podcast by Global Future X. My name is Cazadira F Tamzil, and let's solve the future now. We're on season 1, episode 2, and we have the absolute privilege to welcome Rachel Abigail Saveria, founder of Girls Can Lead and prominent advocate for gender equality and women leadership. So, very nice to meet you, Abigail.
Thank you for having me, Azira.
Finally, we meet in person after emails and texts and all that. So
I know. So happy to be here.
Yeah, and we're so happy to welcome you because
thank you so much.
This season of Breaking Barriers podcast is purely on women in leadership. So we will talk to women leaders across different sectors, different issues, and we want to basically have a frank discussion about what more needs to be done to advance women representation across sectors, as well as really get to the heart of what is really causing gender inequality in our society today, especially in Indonesia.
Yep.
Yeah. And we also understand that you have experiences working for other Southeast Asian countries and
yes.
working in other Southeast Asian countries, so we're interested to hear as well how Indonesia compares to those others.
Okay, so as you already know, I've been working in the past few years with both nonprofit organizations and also different governments, especially in the focuses in women and youth leadership in Southeast Asia. So to answer to your questions, if we want to compare, I will say Indonesia is actually quite leading. I wouldn't say we already at our best, but as you might know, some of the countries in the region still facing a form of dictatorship in terms of their government. So for sure, Indonesia is leading. We maintain through the up and downs our democratic society, which obviously impact women in particular on how we have more freedom to pursue a much higher place in our society. But on the other hand, I think it's similar pattern in other Southeast Asia country as well, with a society as diverse as Indonesia and with a combination of different cultural values, religious values. Of course, there is a barrier for women. And so I will say, again, if back to your questions, we are one step ahead. We are in the right direction, but I guess there is still more that needs to be done.
Great. So before we talk more about Indonesia and how it compares to other Southeast Asian countries when it comes to gender equality, I'm very interested to get to know about you as well, and like your story, your background, how you got into gender equality, advocacy, and all that, and also about Girls Can Lead. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
So my interest towards gender equality, especially in particular women, I think it started from home. I mean, I am raised by a single mom, and then I have a very strong female figures within my family as well. Most of my aunties are working women, so that is something that I used to when I grew up. But then when I start to enter the society, it appears not the case. And I think I consider myself privileged enough because I never thought as a kid, as a daughter, as a woman, I cannot thrive for like a good future. But apparently that's not a general norm, at least in Indonesia. But then it doesn't really bother me much at that time. But when I literally just entered my first work. At that time, I was an intern at the City Hall of Jakarta. I worked for the governor back then, and then I realized in a couple of different meetings that I attend, I never saw a woman leader. So yeah, it got me just thinking, and then I discussed with my friends who's at that time also still young, just entering the workforce, and yeah, they have the similar thoughts as well. We never have women who lead the meetings, and we found out that not many of our friends as well are interested in politics or government. So long story short, we decided to start something. At the time, we call it Perempuan Politik. So initially we want to spark more discussion about why women have to involve in government and have to be aware with the political situations around them. But after long discussions, we thought that hey, it's not only women in politics. Apparently the number is similar across different sectors, be it in the government, in the business sector. So for example, at that time, the member of parliament who are women, only 17.3%. That is back in 2017. And then after the new administration it increased only 3%, so it became 20% until now. So it's still way beyond even the global standard of having like a good number of representation, which is 30%. So it got us thinking again, what can we do actually aside of making a discussions, doing these talk shows here and there. So finally we come up with the ideas that after we read different research, that actually the root of apolitical situation in Indonesia, especially among women, is because we're not get used to it since we were kids. Our education system is very much one way. We never being encouraged to debate each other, to spark a discussion, to collaborate. It's all about competition. It's all about the score on the paper, but never about how we can as a community build something together, which is very important skills if you want to be a leader, right? So that's why we finally come up with the idea of Girls Can Lead. Initially, it's the name of our leadership camp, but then we decided to use it as the whole organization's name. So since 2017, it started as just a small movement. We start the camp initially in one of the Islamic boarding school in West Java, but then apparently it attract different donors to support our movement. Unfortunately, it's still not from Indonesia. Okay. So up until today, our supporter is always come from outside, mainly in the US, but also some other NGOs in Europe and also in Southeast Asia. So since 2017 up until last year, we managed to implement 5-6 different leadership camp, mainly in eastern part of Indonesia. So we've done twice in Poso, Central Sulawesi. We done once in Maluku, and last year we do it like nationwide because it's online. Okay. So it's a very interesting experience. It's coming from a very personal background, personal stories. But then, I'm happy that it can be sort of like a small movement. And after that, I got the opportunity to pursue my master's degree in the UK. So that sort of solidified my interest, which used to be like a voluntary work, but then I focused mainly on gender policy when I studied in the UK. So when I'm back, it sort of shaped my identity professionally. So ever since I've been working as a consultant in different projects, mainly in Southeast Asia, that focus on women and youth.
Right. Oh my God, there's a lot to unpack there, Abigail, and it's so amazing. I think you're right that it has, shaped your identity because, we knew each other before we met each other, right? Like we met each other virtually on LinkedIn, and you're like kind of one of the top of mind, when it comes to like gender equality advocacy in Indonesia, like in my circle. So I think it's really great what you're doing, because I really see that one of the biggest barriers for women leadership is the lack of role model that we get from a young age, right? The role model of a young women leader. And I think I was very privileged because I went to an all-girl high school. So we basically, there was no job or work that was not for women. We basically had to do everything all on our own, and we had a lot of amazing young female leaders at that point, like doing organizational work and things like that. But definitely more needs to be done. Not everyone has that privilege, and you have your mom, and I have like the women in my all-girl high school, and I think what you're doing more is really great, that we have to just have more of these role models come to the forefront and tell their stories and all that.
Agreed. And I think talking about role model, that is something that we realized like pretty early when we're doing Girls Can Lead especially. So what we did at that time is we also invite different women leaders, and we took a very grassroots approach, in a sense that we don't only talk about women in a national or global scale. We try to find what is relevant for these girls who's living in a mainly rural area of Indonesia. So what we did is we collaborate with the local youth organizations, and we give space for women leaders in those areas to also speak to this younger generation. So we have women who's work at PLN, for example, in Maluku, that speak to these girls. We have the vice mayor at that time in Ambon, who's speaking also to these girls, who also raised in the similar community, who apparently some of our participants also went to the same high school like them. So it's more resonance. But then if we can also, spotlight on this women leader from their own community, then it can be more relevant, and it then sparks their interest, give them more hope that, hey, even someone who went to the same high school like me, who was born and raised in the same city, same village, can also
make it big.
Can make it big in their community. So actually, that's what we want to do, like be the champion of your own community. It doesn't have to be like globally known, then make you somebody, but it can be start as small as possible.
Right. You shared a very important point there about like women not being a monolithic category, because different women have different opportunities, exposure, and as you mentioned, like there is a divide, I think, in Indonesia as well between the rural and the urban women, right? Like maybe for us, like we're more privileged to information networks and things like that. What do you see as like the biggest challenge outside of the lack of female role models? What is the biggest challenge for women in rural areas, for example, or maybe you have other category of women that you think we should like give more attention to?
In terms of those in rural areas, I think the conversation that kept appearing when I was there is the fact that even to pursue higher education is already a challenge for them. And it's not come from the society, because, for example, like in Ambon, in Maluku, they do have university. As well, and in Poso, they don't have to go to Palu, but there is a local university there. But then, in terms of like the cultural aspect, especially from the family, they still do segregate between like their boys and their girls. And if they come from low income community, they will obviously prioritize the boys more when it comes to higher education. And that's where the gaps start to become. And when they are not able, the young women not able to pursue higher education, what left for them is either they help the parents at home becoming a caretaker, which is not being paid obviously, or they are being sent to be married. And it comes another problem then. Child marriages still high in rural areas in Indonesia, and then if they already come into marriages, health problem will arise because they are too young actually to be married. And then domestic abuse, it's also one of the root cause, because there is then a gap of power between the husband and the wife, and it eventually led to more mortality rate that high for young women who married early. So there's like a really
extensive list.
Yeah, extensive
of
list of impact that was created just because they are not able to go to school. So I think if there can be an intervention of or a policy just to be able to pursue higher education is very significant for these young girls to be able to, have better start after that. So I guess that's what I see right now. And another thing is if we are talking from the urban areas, because I'm at the age where most of my friends start getting married and then have kids as well. I guess at this point, I just want to say, just try to be kind to one another, because different women have different life stage, different privilege as well, and we can move forward together as a society if we allow people, especially women, to have their own agency. Sometimes we can be pretty cruel as well. We thought that, okay, if we want to progress, all women have to work or have to fit in this certain box. Well, that's not actually the case. Whether they want to be a stay-at-home mother, they want to work remotely, they want to be very, ambitious with their career, they want to have kids or not kids, we have to be able to accept that, because that's the ultimate goal actually that we want to achieve. So yeah, I think those two things, I can speak more, but I think that those two things that I can see right now become a challenge for women to progress.
Right. And when we're talking about what you mentioned earlier about power imbalance, I think it also stems from the women having a lack of confidence in themselves as well, right?
Yep.
Because all their lives, maybe they were taught by their parents, like, oh, maybe they're less than their siblings that are men, boys, So I think it really all starts from home.
Yes.
First, like parents, right? They need to really be able to have like this change in paradigm, I would say, right? Like, really women can be leaders, and it's not that, oh, he's a guy and so he has to like have all these privileges because he'll start his own family. Women will also start their own family, right?
Yes.
So I think it needs to start with parents, and then as you mentioned, we need to have the government also change their policies in some ways, right? And I want to unpack that a little bit more. So what do you think has been done in Indonesia that's good? And what do you think can be done more of, maybe in the context of education, as you mentioned before?
First of all, of course, we have to mention the recent event of finally we have the bill,
Yes.
the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act. I think that is one of the greatest accomplishments that we have as a country, regardless the political situation whatsoever behind that. But it does take a village, and it's almost 5 years, right, since 2014 that many grassroots women organizations has been fighting for this. So it's we should be proud as a community, first and foremost, to be able to manage to reach that milestone. But in terms of what can be done more, I think again because our work with Girls Can Lead is pretty much focused mainly on the rural areas in eastern part of Indonesia. I will say to give more access, give more support to those in the rural areas. Although yes, our population are concentrated in Java and Sumatra, but then we won't be again progress together as a community if we left these people behind. So I really hope that both not only the national government but also the local one can start to focus more on women, or focusing on implementing gender equality kind of policy in their community. And the other hand is, I think it's good as well to have that value being instilled in our education system, because to be frank, I understand this concept only when I already in college, university, right? I don't know if it's you also feel the same, but pretty much everybody, this is something that recent. Usually we have that experience, but we cannot really, elaborate it.
What it
what is actually was right. But then when we finally got into university, oh, that's apparently inequality that I experienced. So I hope that the younger generation doesn't have to go through that. I hope it can, of course, first start from home, and second one, when they enter the school, they don't have to experience such an imbalance as well, because I hear many stories from the girls in Poso, in Maluku, how even their teacher, tends to favor the boys. If they want to, for example, want to be the head of the class, but then like, oh, you're a girl, why don't you become the secretary instead? You can have the boys to become the leader. So I hope it can be implemented and also become a norm in the educational institution, because that's where our kids spend most of their time during childhood. So I guess those two.
Yeah, definitely. So we've talked about kind of changing the mind, and maybe adding to your point, you mentioned also about like critical thinking, right?
Yes.
So maybe when you see gender-based discrimination, you don't take that as something that, oh yeah, everybody goes through it, and then you kind of accept it or justify it, but you actually from a young age are taught to be sensitive to gender-based discrimination, because they're not always explicit, right?
Yes.
Sometimes they can be just like from the words that people say, or from the little actions that they do, right? But being sensitive to gender imbalance, I think, is very important as well, to be instilled both at home and in education systems. And then the government also needs to mainstream maybe changes in education system through policies, right? And then our lawmakers have done a great thing by passing the bill, but now it's about how do you enforce that bill, right, going forward. And last but not least, I also want to talk about kind of what you mentioned earlier about resources, right? Because in your experience, resources are mostly not from Indonesia.
Yes.
Unfortunately, from other countries,
Yes.
right? So I'm interested to see, like, because obviously resources are close to the private sector, right?
Yes.
Usually we look to private companies with their CSR funds and things like that. What is your observation on that in Indonesia? Have they done like quite good initiatives in that area, or what should they do more of?
Okay, in terms of like the private sector in Indonesia, again, this is just my observation because I haven't yet directly worked with them, but there is obviously a growth I see, especially maybe in the tech industry, because it's very much close with like innovation and very much more global than other sector. It became a norm already. I mean, I heard lots of like good initiative from my friends, especially women who working in this tech industry, and how they are being supported, although they have to go through different phases of life, be it marry, become a mother, but they manage to retain their own employees. So I think it's a good thing for this industry. But I guess for the other sector, I haven't seen like much progress yet. I hope we will in the near future. But in terms of the government, I think there is a significant interest as well. I think it's a good thing that our president right now, Pak Jokowi, have this great women leaders leading once a male-dominated ministries, such as foreign affairs, the finance, and it gives a great deal of support to women to see like a good representative of themselves in such a top-notch position. But then again, I see the resources is still lack. I think we can do more. Right now, I feel like it's a long history, but basically the non-profit sector in Indonesia, it's slightly different with what happened in the US or in the UK. They are much more established there, so they don't have to get funded by government or by private sector. They can do fundraising, they can have even their own business, become a social entrepreneurship, but those resources or framework is not yet exist in Indonesia. So that's why maybe focus topics like mind, gender equality, or things like sustainability, environment, is not yet popular here in Indonesia, and it's rather hard for these organizations to push ahead because the framework itself is not yet exists.
Yeah.
I mean, just as simple as when like my extended family asks like, where do you work, and when I mention about nonprofit or NGO, people used to mention, oh, isn't that the one who like to do demonstration
Right.
or like can you really work from there? I mean, can you make a living? So it's still not yet established, and it's rather hard to explain it. So I think once the framework is there, and then we can more progress further, because here nonprofit is not yet become a really strong enforcement to the government. It's very different in the US. Like nonprofit become one of the sources or one of the supporter, and politician will ask for their endorsement, support in certain policies. It's not the case here. We're pretty much still figure oriented, right? So yeah, there's a lot work to be done in that case, but I hope with passing the bill of this can be one of a good example how this grassroots movement, these NGOs can actually become a good force, and hopefully then will inspire our government to make a more better framework for nonprofit, for NGOs to have a say also in the community, because they are the one who become the extension of the government hand on certain topics that the government might not able to work on it.
Yeah. So Abigail, I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier about your experience in the US, because maybe you can tell our audience here as well. You have extensive experiences in the US. You've undertaken a couple of fellowship programs, and you've also become a consultant for a number of US-led development projects. And I want to hear if you have specific examples of how public, private, and community leaders have worked together meaningfully in the US to advance solutions for specific problems, like say gender equality or maybe other issues.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of my experience in the US, I guess I'm privileged enough to get the opportunity back in 2017 to take on a fellowship there. It was a program from the US state government at that time, and I got the opportunity to study about civic engagement in one of the universities there. So that's actually when I start to get more confidence on implementing projects on my own, and that's the first source of support I would say that I get to finally able to implement Girls Can Lead for the first time. So I'm grateful for that opportunity, and it's sort of what keep the ball rolling eventually, because there I get the opportunity to meet with different NGO leaders. I get the opportunity to visit at that time the Capitol Hill. I'm getting the opportunity as well to share about our work here in Indonesia, and that's where the connections start to be made. So I think it's very important to have network. It's very important to have this support system, to bring you confidence, because that is something that back then not quite as a well-known topic in Indonesia. So and in terms of that, finally because of my connection with the US, when I finished my master's degree in the UK, because I was part of their alumni, and I think this is one of the first good thing that I observe about US government is they are really good in maintaining their connection.
Right.
And it goes until the very last bit, which is someone like back then I was just 23 years old. I mean, if you want to make a connection, usually you tend to go after the big people, right? But they start early, which is good, which is I think something that we have to take an example for, if you ask about the second question as well. So I got the opportunity to eventually help them, support them in implementing different projects, mainly in the regional level in Southeast Asia. But that means I also represent Indonesia in a way, because some of our participants in the program, of course, there has to be Indonesia as well, and Indonesia tends to have like the highest number of applicants because our big populations, and that's where I get the opportunity to learn more about the in and out of working in the development sector, and I observed a lot from what they did in terms of implementing such project. And then in terms of the question that you asked, what else that we can learn from the US, aside from the networking bits, I think the example that I saw, especially in terms of gender equality, is the act of philanthropy that was being done by many of prominent figure in the US. I think one of the most leading example in terms of gender equality is Melinda French Gates. I mean, with all the resources that they have and the wealth that they accumulate over the year, it's very notable that they eventually focus more on their philanthropic activities, and that's where they start to campaign not only in the US but globally about health, because that's their first main focus, but then about gender equality. And they also went to Indonesia, right? I think went to Gojek office, a couple of years ago, talked with different women writers back then. So I think it's really good to see that example. And again, that's what I mentioned earlier. The philanthropic situation or framework is very well established there. So people tend to already have from their early age this sense of community, how they have to give back. And I will just say Indonesia is not like that. I think I saw a recent survey, or not really recent, like last year. Indonesia is one of the most very giving community. But then it's one hand to have that money as a resource, right? But then if you not have like the exact framework, then where the money goes. Usually in Indonesia, the help that we give to people tend to be tangible, tend to be very short time focus. You give food, you give health support, but that's that. I mean, there's so many examples where you help some groups or people with such opportunity, not even opportunity, with that kind of help, it won't stay long. So I think what we have to shift is our mindset in terms of nonprofit. It's not about just giving it one time and done. It's about how we can make these people to be independent even after we left, and they can have a better life, a better education, a better health care. And I guess that's our homework then, how we can give these people the opportunity to be better without any support anymore in the future, because we cannot, every time there is somebody who is sick or lack of education, we cannot give just money or food all the time. People have their own limitation, right? Even the private sector with the most money, if they keep giving out just food, people will still coming back, to ask for more. But if we give them like the skills for them to build something out of their life, then even after we're gone, the intervention is done, they can still progress further. So I guess that's the second most important lesson that I see on how they try to, when they do intervention, they think it for a long term, not only like short-term impact.
They don't just give fish, they give tools to fish, right? And
the skills
to be able to fish, right? So I think it's very important. So it's actually very interesting because as you mentioned, there are a lot of philanthropic figures from the US that are interestingly not just working on gender equality as like a standalone issue, but they're trying to kind of have or they're trying to get mainstream gender into different issues in different sectors, right? And I think it's very important that we look at gender not just as a standalone issue, but it's actually intersecting, right, with like economic issues, health,
it is
sustainability and things like that. So I think going forward, that framework you mentioned, I think is important for policymakers, community leaders, and private sector to also
Paying
have
attention,
gender
yeah.
sensitivity, right, in whatever it is that they do. And the most important thing, as you mentioned, for the programs and the projects, they cannot just be short term. They have to have a long term view on how this can help really advance our society,
Yes.
right?
Yes, totally agree. And I think I see a glimpse of hope if we refer back to Indonesia. I mean, the fact that we have LPDP.
Yes.
Many, I remember vividly, like back in the UK, many of my friends, from international friends, I quite surprised that some of these Indonesian people can, pursue higher education, and not just in regular universities, so many good universities, like what you also did in the UK. So they are very, admire the fact that our government support us as well, because many of other countries, aside from the rich one, of course, are not able to do so or not have the commitment to do so. But I think this is really good, because what the government that looking forward, obviously it's not a short-term impact. Investing in education is a long-term impact. So I think it's a good start, and I think we can see, I hope to see more progress through this in the long run.
So for the audience who doesn't know, LPDP is a scholarship provided by the Indonesian government, primarily by the Ministry of Finance. So it's an education endowment fund that's used to kind of fund bright people who want to pursue a master or PhD studies abroad, and then also they're now investing in like research projects and other types of maybe development projects. So it's very interesting, as you said, right?
Yes.
So in Indonesia we have LPDP investing also in young women, and then also we have the bill, the sexual
harassment
bill
and the sexual harassment,
as you mentioned before. So it seems like we're getting in the right direction, but now it's a matter of like how we can really be working towards the same direction and really scaling up all of these initiatives and projects, right?
Great.
So maybe to kind of close off, if you maybe have like some real concrete stories of like how community leaders, for example, can try to advance more problem solving in our society, right? So how can the government work together better with community leaders, and how can the private sector also work together better with the community leaders, right? Because I think your experience is more from the community side, right? And so it's very interesting to see how, if we want to advance collaborative governance in Indonesia, what can community leaders do more of in the future, and what can public and private leaders do to be more receptive and work together better with community leaders?
That's a good question. I think first of all, start by listening to those people. I think that's very important, because sometimes we just make an assumption based on what we know and then based on our research, but then not really talk to these people. And I try to, myself exercise that early. So when I implement Girls Can Lead, first it's still a concept, right? But then I do go directly. First time I implement it in the eastern part of Indonesia, I went there by myself to Poso, and it was my first time I went there. Like my mom, are you sure? I mean, at that time, you listen lots of news about Poso, but then I connected with these youth organizations, and it turns out my experience is really good there, and I coming back again after that to Poso. So I think it's very important, if we want to progress further, to really speak to the community, because that's where the change that you want to see. It's not on a policy level, it's not yet on a policy level, it's not on the government national level, it's within the people. So start by listening to them first, because you can make an assumption, yes, but then you have to verify it, right? Otherwise it's just gonna be another unused policy or wrong target kind of policy, and it happens a lot in Indonesia, the case of that. So I think it's important with that, because having that feedback it's really good to then scale up the program or any kind of intervention that you want to do in the community. And second of all, in terms of targeting a community, I think it's good. We already have this lots of different progress, but don't forget to the vulnerables one or the community that are still left behind. It can be in terms of geographical wise, but it can also be in terms of if someone have physical disabilities, right, or they're coming from a very minority group in terms of religion, in terms of culture. Like we cannot left them behind, and it's really important to also take their advice, take their thoughts into consideration, because it might be a good policy in general, right? But then it might be something that you cannot implement that to this certain community. So it's always good to take diverse perspective. So yeah, diversity is hard. It's a hard work. Yeah. You cannot do it alone. So a lot of listenings, a lot of thoughts process is good. And I think I learned this a lot lastly from lots of my friends in the development sector, is the fact that we have to be patient. Okay. It's good to have the resources in terms of money, network. It's good you have these ideas, but it also takes time to see this progress. I even keep telling myself, hey, I don't think you will experience the best standard that you want in your generation. But then I also stand in the shoulder of all women and men who prior to me fighting for this equality, fighting for this environment that we live right now. So right now, I guess it's just how I can pay it forward, so the future generations can experience better than what I experience now.
That's great. That's great. And as you mentioned, we all will stand on each other's shoulder. And men and women, we really have to see eye to eye that this is an issue that faces all of us. Yes. If we really truly want to advance, we need to leave no one behind. And then also women, we need to support each other. Don't get into this mode of competition with other women, because truly each other's advancement is a win for both parties, right? So I think you ended it very nicely there, that we all have to work together. We need to listen first and foremost, right? And community leaders, they're really close to the people that are the recipients of policies, and also maybe consumers from products made by the private sector, for example, right? So if we all want to do better, we need to really start listening to each other a little bit better going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I have really great time, so thank you so much.
It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure it will inspire a lot more people.
I hope so.
And to all of you, support Girls Can Lead initiatives. You have any initiatives coming this year that maybe you want to share? Or?
In terms of Girls Can Lead, at this point, not yet. I mean, we just finished our academy last year, so it's been our 6th or 5th implementation, and we just want to take a step back and see, how we can improve and progress further. And I think this is a transition period, because we just back to have more live in-person interaction. So I hope next year most likely we can implement the in-person again.
Sure. So everyone keep an eye out on what Girls
on our social media.
On their social media, and also follow Abigail on her social media. We'll link it down below.
Yes.
So. Thank you once again, Abigail.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful conversation with you, and let's hope for a better future going forward, where there's more collaborative governance between public, private, and community leaders, and more gender sensitivity in all policies and market practices and mindsets. Thank you once again, Abigail.
Thank you.